Hey, I'm Scott Perdue, and I've got Juan Brown from Blancolirio and FlyWire, and we're going to do BSWorks. I think this is episode number 4, and we're going to interview Larry Lee. He's an L-39 pilot. He was racing his L-39 at Reno in 2013 when he had a midair and broke his rudder and the upright and the vertical. So it was an incredible story. He almost didn't make it here to talk to us. So, but he did. And there's a lot of great lessons learned about having a dire emergency and focusing and flying and all that kind of stuff and training ahead of time. So without further ado, I'm going to swing it to Larry, and he's going to tell us a little bit about himself, his flying background, and then jump into the setup.
All right. Well, Scott, thank you for the introduction and for having me on today. And Juan, thank you for coming on board. I started flying in 1965, right out of high school in South Florida. Got my rating that summer, private pilot's rating. And then in the course of the time since then, have been accumulating hours, never flew commercial, or I should say for hire, and never was in the military. But during those 50 some plus years, I've always wanted to experience various types of aircraft. And early on, had tail wheel experience, flew antiques, still do, gliders, helicopters, and every single one of these different types of flying experiences, I feel helps me with my ability to deal with circumstances when they come up, because it just broadens my knowledge base. Took that to I would call it an extreme in the air racing in the jet, but also entered a couple of international races. In '92, flew a race around the world, over the Atlantic at 3 a.m. and over the Northern Pacific, coming into the United States and back across the Atlantic to the finish line in Cannes. It was a ARC-NCL sponsored event. And then in '97, my wife and I entered an air race from Iceland to Turkey, which we had the opportunity and to fly in, but we also won the gold medal for it. So that was an exciting adventure for us both. I've got 18,000 hours of flying time, again, all of it basically in civilian aircraft. So, this particular event took place in 2013 at Reno, and this is after I'd had the jet since about 2007, I think is when I purchased it, and had raced it the previous year, and this was the second year that I had taken it out to the event. So.
And this at Reno, this was during pylon racing school, not during the air races themselves.
That is correct. This took place in June, which is where the rookies, the new people, come on board to learn how to fly the pylons and recognize them and learn the safety and basically the adversary formation flying that we do. But it's also an opportunity for any certified racer to get on the course for half an hour or so during that week to do some practice. And I wanted every opportunity I could to be able to do that flying. Obviously we're flying at 400 plus knots, 50 feet off the ground, going across the ground at some 600 to 700 feet a second. So it's an experience you want to experience, but you also got some things there you got to do to keep from having problems. And in this particular situation, my goal was to really concentrate on learning how to fly in the wake turbulence of the jets. So the two guys that were certified racers that were on the course with me, we were basically leapfrogging each other and slowing down and letting the other guy get behind us and then have to figure out what to do. And that was the whole goal of that event, was to do that. And as I mentioned a minute ago, my goal in addition to that was to fly closer and closer to the pylon, because you've got 10 pylons on an 8-mile course. When you think about the numbers there, that's about 4,000 foot between each pylon, and these pylons are phone poles. So at 4,000 feet and 100 feet above the ground, if you're that high, it's hard to see these things. And so getting down and recognizing the ground scars and things like that are significantly important. And that was what I was practicing during this particular exercise.
And of course, when you're practicing, you said leapfrogging, you're passing in the classic air race style that you have to pass high into the outside. Nobody can ever pass anybody on the inside of each other.
And that's a good point, and that's very true. And interestingly, what transpires here, and we'll see it as we play the video, is that I asked that question to the head of our training department, and he puts his finger basically in my face and says, "Larry, how many times do I have to tell you this? You got to pass on the outside." I said, "Well, yeah, but what if the guy in front of you is really, really wide?" And I don't talk about 50 feet wide. I'm talking about 300-400 feet wide. He says, "Well, nobody's going to do that." But yes, if a guy is really way wide on the course, then if you absolutely can guarantee that you can get by him, that type of clearance, and he's not on the course effectively, because of course, again, on that big course that the jets fly on, it's basically 500. It's 10 planes wide, 50 feet of lane, so it's about 500 feet wide. And if guys out there 500 feet away, sometimes a person will go wide on a turn on purpose to push everybody out a little bit, but there's an extremity to that. So we had that debate just before this particular event that took place. But yes, ideally, you do pass on the outside, above and outside, and you would literally wait for the person you're passing to tell you you're clear. And once he says you're clear, then you can pull in. So, all right.
Mm-hmm. And jet stuff, your company traffic's approaching the home pilot.
And incidentally, my aircraft is race 777.
Okay, so that's you, 777. We're looking at this from the perspective of race 7, who's on your outside.
That is correct, at the home pylon, which is what's there. Yep. And what I was really trying to show here is that, and I think I remember one of your videos, you mentioned this, but basically the pilot's face cannot be below the top of the pylon.
Right.
So, these are basically 50-foot tall pylons, which means your wingtips are, 20 to 30 feet off the ground at the lowest, and they don't want us above 250 feet.
Right.
So this airplane, race 7, is he'd like to fly high, and he's probably up at about 180 feet or 200 foot right there as he was coming around me at the home pylon.
And for folks at home that aren't familiar with this maximum altitude rule, this is something that was new to air racing following the Leeward Galloping Ghost accident, where they don't want aircraft up so high that if they have a problem at these kind of speeds, they can reach all the way into the grandstands. So now they've got the maximum altitude capped off.
Correct. All right, go ahead. And the other thing about my aircraft is that it's a low vis paint job, which makes it difficult to see.
Yeah, great.
Go ahead. Center around P9 is this time. We coming down to shoot in about 3 minutes. Race course. We've got 3 jets on the course. All right, we'll call 30 seconds to the shoot. We'd like them to go to cool down or the queue and let us enter. Then you're welcome to join us. 15 minutes remaining. 99 on your right.
This is the home stretch of this Valley of Speed, it's called, heading back toward the grandstands right now.
Yep.
All right, let's pause it right here. This photograph is actually obviously taken out of another aircraft, Race 99, and this is the aircraft that I had the incident with just a few seconds before the event. And as you can see, we're on this oval track, basically is oriented north and south. We're on the eastern side of it, heading north right now.
Yep, and you're over the motocross course there, it looks like.
Yep, and the sun, this is late in the afternoon, the winds are blowing. That's why they put the unlimiteds and us at the end of these events, because we can handle the wind levels typically better. But this is literally just a few minutes before closing the course down at 5 o'clock, and the sun is getting low in the sky to the west. And this gentleman in race 99 is new, so he's trying to understand where the pylons are, and he's flying wide on the course because my aircraft in a second here will show up inside of him. So let's go ahead and play it. All right, right in here we can stop it. And like I say, he's now looking, toward me. What he's seeing is sunshine and glare on his cockpit, etc. But he's also unfamiliar with the course track, and I'm following my ground cue, getting ready to go into a 5.5 G pull at pylon 4. When he is getting wide on the course because he's not familiar with where it is, and he's flying up a hill. If you recall that, right up the side of the course, it goes up about 300 feet if you get very wide. All right, go ahead. Now, Ray 7 is pulled up in the cool down area, and he's left the course, and we're still down on the course line. So the blue track is basically showing where the course is and the aircraft that are remaining on it. And I'm following race 99, who is, again, still flying wide, looking for pylons. And certainly, as where we're on any race course, if you're wide on the course, you're going to be going slower. And even though I was trying to stay behind him and stay in his wake or jet wash, it became more and more difficult as he got wider and wider on the course. You can also see there's the houses there really close to the racetrack on the right side.
Mm.
And right here, 99 is heading up the hillside. So I'm keeping him in my view, but I'm now concentrating on getting close to this pylon that I'm trying to get close to. So he's watching race 707. And when 707 makes an abrupt turn, he turns.
Mm.
All I had time to do there was basically try to duck.
Larry, did you roll out at all?
I did. I was going to say I was pulling 5 Gs right here, but seeing him abruptly turn and heading, I'm not that far away from him, and I could see him looking down course at the other aircraft. So he's concentrating on that, and the sun is right behind, or right past me.
Yeah.
And right here, as he makes the turn, I get ding basically from rah-rah because I'm passing on the inside, which, that's an arguable point, but certainly not my perspective on what was taking place there. But nonetheless, right here, I go wings level to try to get, I didn't want to go belly up to him even more and pull hard into the infield, nor possibly climb into him since he's coming downhill at that point. So what I try to do is just basically duck under him. So.
Yeah, I was just
so you rolled wings level and tried to duck underneath as 99 crossed basically right at your path.
Right. Yep.
And
that's probably why it hit the rudder, the vertical, the way it did, and folded it over.
Oh, right. Yeah. And again, we'll get into that as we move forward here. A few more slides.
And there's the impact right there.
Yep.
So 99 had lost sight of you.
I never had sight of me. And once he passed, he had passed me, and was now his concentration was on the aircraft in front of him that he was following, which it needed to have been. It's just that I assumed he had an engine problem, was going off the course because he was climbing and flying away from the track.
Which he did a right turn.
And pardon me?
He did a right.
I went wings level right there.
I know you did, but No, he
Earlier on, you mentioned that he had done a right-hand
Well,
turn
yeah, right. Yeah.
leading up to this.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah.
And what was that all about?
Well, very interestingly is that they were told to follow each other, stay in line while we're sighting the pylons. And the goal here was that the lead aircraft, which is out in front of race 707,
Mm-hmm.
is he's a half a lap in front right now. And how that came about, being able to see that, was that the pylon judges that I had helping me were taking pictures on the ground of everybody as they went by. And so I've got timestamp photographs of when the lead aircraft went by the pylon 5, the one out in the middle of the field. And then when 707 went by, and this is in previous laps, and the time between the first airplane that's leading this gaggle of 3 new guys was 30 seconds. And as you're well aware, at a course speed of basically a minute to minute and a half a lap, he's a half a lap in front.
Yeah.
These guys aren't following him. They're out there lost on their own. And what I'm showing here is that although obviously the Statue of Liberty is not standing there, in fact, we hit below the feet of where the Liberty would be, which is 100, 125 feet was the impact point. And I mentioned that because people that were in the tower said they saw clearly my aircraft climb up and hit the other aircraft from the bottom because it was in blue sky. And if we went back to that, you're not in blue sky until you're 700 foot off the ground from the tower at that pylon out there, that pylon. And you and every pilot that might be watching this knows that if you've been flying low over the beach, looking at things and watching sharks, et cetera, and then you climb up to 200 feet, you feel like you're up in the stratosphere. So to be at 700 feet, which is what it would take for me to be visible above the ground terrain from the tower area, is absolutely not what would have happened. But nonetheless, that's where we ended up at the end of the during a debrief, having that conversation. So, all right, let's proceed.
All right.
Oh, this is your aircraft inside your aircraft.
This is me, and obviously this is obviously video reconfiguration that I've created here. But what happened right at impact is that my plane, one major impact feeling, not any idea what happened, other than the fact that I saw the nose of his airplane clear my right wingtip. And instantly I had severe vibration and a yaw to the right and a roll to the right. And my nose came up abruptly. My rotor pedals were jammed hard right and would not move to the left. And the rudders on the L-39 are basically a bar, like a steering wheel of a bicycle or handlebar. Push the right one down and the left one comes up. It's just one single bar. So it was jammed right rudder, and the plane is trying to roll and climb. So I'm pushing hard forward, although not the full deflection, but I'm pushing against 100 pounds of pressure at least, and left aileron as the plane is trying to roll right. My instinct was to throttle back from my 102% that I was basically at right then, doing about 420, 430, something like that. And as I throttled back, the vibration reduced, which was good. As I throttled back a little bit more, the vibration reduced a little bit more, but the plane now started rolling harder to the right, and I was at full left deflection when it got inverted on me. Coming off the ground there, only 100 feet or so. But I knew there was a valley on the other side of the little bit of a hill that we were heading to, and that hopefully if I could clear that hilltop, I'd have a few hundred feet to try to do something. But what I recognized that was working or not working was that coming off on the power, I lost control. I didn't gain control by doing that. And we're talking about full power versus 95%. But as the plane got down into the 250 knot range, it rolled inverted. So I let it, and it rolled faster the slower I got. So I let it continue to roll inverted until it started coming out of that, at which time I went back to full power because that was the only thing that kept the plane right side up. So as I was going down the hillside on the backside of that mountainside, I figured out that I could control the roll rate with power. And again, there's not too many minutes worth of time went by there. Yeah. I'd say maybe 3 or 4 seconds. But as I got the plane right side up and got the nose reduce some of the back or the forward pressure I had on the stick, it wanted to climb. What it really wanted to do is a zoom climb, which I had, again, no understanding about what was happening. I think important to understanding the story, what it turns out to have happened is that when the nose of his aircraft, and actually it was right the side of his fuselage, right next to where the pilot sits, hit the vertical fin of my aircraft, and it laid the rudder and vertical stabilizer down on top of the left elevator and stabilizer. And when it did it took with it all but about 6 inches of the rudder, and it broke the connecting rods, which are push rod in that aircraft instead of cables. It bent them in such a way that it locked the rudder into full right deflection, which is what I was feeling on the rudder pedals, but basically a full up elevator now, secondary elevator.
For what was left of the elevator and rudder. Wow.
No. The rudder, the vertical fin and the rudder were now laying down on top of the horizontal, and I had a half of an elevator sticking straight up on the left side of the airplane. But I actually think what had happened is that, and this is all theoretical because it departed the airplane eventually, which we'll get into, is that I think it was wrapped around the leading edge because it was all I could do was full left deflection, half nose down deflection, and power. And power is what I found that I could work with. And so as I got that thing right side up, and had gone back to maximum power, which was the shallowest right turn, I ended up with full power. I was at about a 15-degree right bank. At 100% power to 98% power, I'm in about a 35 to 40-degree right bank. And anything less than that, when I was rolling down inverted there, I found that if I was below 220 knots, the plane was out of control and it would roll over. So I knew I needed to keep it above 240 I just picked a number there, but I knew I didn't want to get below 220. And then I was able to nurse the thing back vertically up over the hillside and back southbound toward the airport. I have live seats in this aircraft, but the RAWA required them to be pinned during the race and during this practice session. So certainly that guy's image came into focus about that time on, wished I had a hot seat available, because actually taking my hands off the controls long enough to open the canopy to try to come out was a tumble that was high G, and I wouldn't have been able to do it. So anyway, managed to get the plane out to where I could start to see where the airport was and turn to the right and head back toward the airport from that East Valley. I forget what it's called, but there's a housing area right there that I certainly didn't want to leave the airplane in. So, all right, let's proceed with the video. So, initially, we had vibration, and as I figured out, I started working with the throttle. This thing is yawing to the right, and it's doing it kind of fragmentedly like that. I mean, it's the only way it's not a smooth turn, it's just jerking. But here they pull the power off is when she went inverted on me. And right here is where I decided as soon as it comes back around, I'm going to go back to full power because that was the only thing that kept it right side up. So, and then by letting off of the nose pressure, the pressure for down, I was able to get it to climb up a couple hundred feet. So. Showing the gas gauge here, and in a normal operations, this would indicate, although it's not meant to indicate this, those are kilos, but it would basically indicate that I've got 22 minutes of fuel on board. So we would figure with a full tank about an 85, 90-minute flight. And typically we're on the ground well before this point, but in a race environment, we're running with as light a fuel as possible. And I was just getting ready to pull up into cool down and land when this incident had taken place. And I was right at the airport, so I was not concerned about landing with this kind of fuel status. My challenge right now is that this is no longer 21 minutes worth of flying time. What it actually represents at full power is about 12 minutes worth of flying time. So I knew I had only a few minutes to get this thing on the ground if I was going to be able to do that, since I really didn't feel like I could climb to try to jump out, and I knew I couldn't let go of controls long enough to get the canopy open to jump out. So my focus was on getting this on the ground.
Okay, race 99, race 15, Jordy, we'll take a look at you. Race the other 80 aircraft, I think that we have you in sight coming up on pylon 4. Stay up there, we'll be with you in a moment. We'll control here, but rudder control this is.
All right, right here, I'm thinking, all right, what am I going to do with this airplane that only wants to turn right? And what I recognized was that I was able to, at full power, again, I had about a 15-degree right bank angle, gave me about a 2-mile circle to the right. At 95% power, I had about a 45 to 50-degree bank angle and about 1,000-foot right-hand circle. So by adjusting airspeed with the throttle, I could elongate my circuits there and basically fly myself in a pattern in a direction by just making loops and change the power settings. And that little aircraft that was just up in the image, there was a plane that I did that same thing with back in the mid 80s. Good friend locally, you guys will, I'm sure, know him, but Pat Epps of Epps Aviation had just rebuilt this airplane for his dad, who was one of our pioneers in Georgia. It was just being restored, and he took a flight in it at a little grass airport that we shared, and it flew just to the right. And he was cursing when he got out of it. And he said, "Larry, would you fly this thing and see what you think?" And I was eager to do that. So I hopped in it and, without understanding what the problem was, took off, and it would only go to the right. So I used wind and grass, et cetera, to work my way over the field and get it down on a very broad grass field that wasn't a problem. But I said, well, this jet's just like that airplane, and I can do the same thing with it. So I really reached back to that particular experience to solve the problem I had here.
Safety case, set your position. Cool down, holding 185, airplane tail good. Basically lit.
Of course, I'm flying backwards on the course at this point.
You have a mid-air 77 hits 99 from underneath. 77 this tail is lifting. 99 has no idea the damage to his airplane. Okay, raise 99. Stay your position. This 99 is in cool down.
That was the other aircraft chatting on the radio, obviously trying to get himself on the ground, and the chase plane working with him and the people in the tower. And the whole time I'm heading toward the airport myself. And in fact, at this point, I'm overhead the airport dealing with my own issues and can't talk to anybody on the radio because it's blocked. Can anybody see anything and tell me what's going on with my aircraft? And could anybody give me any thoughts about landing this thing? Is putting the flaps down a bad idea? Is putting the gear down a bad idea? None of that could be communicated. So what I decided to do was I was going to find myself at a perched position, beam the numbers, and hold the aircraft at the minimum flying speed that I had just figured out in the last 3 minutes of flying that I could fly at, which was 240 knots. And I was going to hold level at 240 knots and fly around to line up with the runway if I could and see where I was. Because it looked like to me I had 10 minutes worth of fuel. So I stayed at 500 foot and made this from here. I looked down and saw a spot on the ground that I could identify and started that process. So we got a 30-knot wind out of the northwest that I'm going to hopefully use to correct my right turn and help me line up with the runway. And when I get over this runway, which is running from the northwest to the southeast, runway 14, I'm a half a mile downwind, which is okay because that's all I wanted to know is where was I? So I picked a new spot, what I thought was a half mile upwind, and then used throttle to work my way over to that new location. With the understanding that since I couldn't talk to anybody, is that, well, I'm going to wait. I'm going to start down from 500 feet 240 knots. When I get in the middle of my base turn, I'm going to dump the gear. That was my plan. Middle of my base turn, gear.
Oh.
Whoops. And I end up here in about a second and a half. Scott, if you go ahead with the.
It's playing.
Okay. But it basically it stops just like this, and I've got all the time in the world now that the airplane's upside down, but I'm not dead. And what am I going to do? So, I think it's gotten stuck somehow right here, but it is playing. You're right.
It's right at the end.
Yep. But here's what happened.
Wow, they captured that.
And what's interesting is that two guys are standing, the guys that I had talked with the night before, and one of them puts his camera up and he sees me coming backwards on the course. And as soon as this happens, he looks over his camera and his camera's taking pictures of his feet. His buddy is standing next to him and catches this second part of it where I'm pulling out of this maneuver. And now the gear is back in the belly. And right here, what I hear is the gear shutting, clunk, clunk. And all of a sudden I'm inverted, but now I've got controls. My rudder pedals are free. I've got aileron control. I've got elevator control. The only challenge is that I'm inverted. And the reality of that was that I spent the prior, and this is an important piece of what I like to communicate, is that I spent 2 weeks before this event doing flip-flops at my home base at altitude until I could turn that airplane upside down and halfway through it know exactly what the G load on my shoulder straps would be and where I would be and how hard I got to push on the stick. And I was very comfortable in that inverted position in that aircraft. And so it gave me that ability. I wasn't gasping because of the upside down. And in fact, when I felt the gear shut, which is what I thought I felt, what had actually taken place is that the piece of junk that was on the back of the airplane, the vertical fin and the rudder, ripped off because the tail of the airplane right at that top image there was tucking under. It came to it was actually, it did a 160 degree, basically, I don't even know what that maneuver would be called, but it did a 360 degree roll under. And as it went tail first, that air caught the slipstream caught that rudder and ripped it off the aircraft. And the vertical fin. And when it did that, it freed up my ailerons and it freed up my controls where I had an aircraft that I was actually flying. I just happened to be upside down. So literally at that point, I was not thinking that I needed to turn it back over because it was flying. And so I literally, let's go ahead and roll the film at this point.
Okay, I want to make a quick comment though. Just looking at this video, you can see there's damage to the left horizontal and potentially the left wing as well, the wingtip right there.
What actually happened in right there is that I've still got full deflection of the left aileron in the aircraft because that's what I had been holding for the last 10 minutes. And it was only right at that point when it went just to that stage. And you're right. I guess I had never noticed that tip is certainly shorter. And that it was really strange things that were going on in the back of the airplane. But right now, it was the first time it had been actually controllable. My only challenge is that I didn't have my 240 knots. And so I literally cobbed the throttle back up right here and flew it inverted, not knowing how long it would run inverted. It's supposed to only run for we're only supposed to hold it upside down for 17 seconds. But I was not in a rush to turn it back over because right now I could fly it. So I literally turned toward the runway inverted like this.
Regarding the landing gear, you lowered the landing gear and that started this whole sequence of events. And then did the landing gear itself slam shut, or did you have the presence of mind to retract the landing gear?
Thank you for bringing that question up because that's exactly something that I did, is that my as you probably, both of you have probably taught, but I certainly learned it, is that I don't touch anything in my cockpit. I touch something, I recognize what I want to have happen. I wait until I get a command that says it took place, and then I let go and go to something else. So literally my hand was on that gear And when I popped it and I had that tumble, I immediately put it back up. And it took half of a rotation for it to come partway out and go back in. But what I thought I was experiencing when I felt that clunk clunk when I was upside down was the gear was shutting. What I was actually experiencing was the tail ripping off.
Yep.
But I thought it was a gear shutting. All right. So, but good point. And I mean, a very important thing to learn and to teach is, you know, wind your watch and do one thing at a time.
Yeah.
And action reaction.
Yep.
All right, let's go back to video. All right, here we go.
So I've got a plane that now is flying, just happens to be upside down, and I'm looking around to see where I'm going, and I literally turn. This happens. You can see it here in a second. Right before I get to this runway that's heading at 14 right here. So when I recover the plane, I'm heading basically north. I look out the side of the aircraft, see the runway, and I literally turn to the runway like this and start down from 100 feet toward the runway. Get about halfway down and recognize that that's not going to be very comfortable. So I really slowly, as I'm trying to cob speed up, but I'm not sure the thing is going to remain flying because I don't have my 240 knots yet. And right about here, as you start to recognize this, at least you will, Juan, is that there's the grandstands.
Right there.
And that's right there is where Jimmy put his airplane.
Yep.
18 months earlier than this. And so we had people scrambling, these guys down on the field were looking up to see what's going on. As I'm coming across, rolling out from being inverted right here. So. But my goal now is to go back to my green spot on the ground, 240 knots, and announce, which I do, that I'm going to land gear up. Don't know how that's going to go, but I know the plane won't. I assume the plane will not fly below 240 because I'm not going to revisit that issue. And this guy comes up next to me and says, "Let's climb to 10,000 feet. We'll get things sorted out." I said, "Negative. I'm landed." So I've now got 10 minutes worth of fuel. And even there's a lot of chatter on the radio. I'm so concentrated. I don't hear anything anymore.
Yep. Tunnel vision.
And the plane is doing this. It's kind of turning in a way in which I could turn it with aileron, but I can't, no rudder, but input's doing anything. So these same guys that took the other photographs were taking these, not knowing what's going on. So I touched down at the threshold of this 9,000 foot runway, doing 240. And right about here, I decide this is not working out the way I want to. I'm going to go off the end. So I go to full power.
Oh, scrape and go. One of the
Yep.
few successful scrape and goes, because you're headed right off to that drop off the abrupt drop off that runway.
That's what I didn't want to go over.
Yeah.
On my belly. So, and right here, ends up being some buildings down there that I forgot were there, and I don't want to go up and go over them and roll inverted. So I go knife edge through the parking lot and go around the left-hand edge of this building that a secretary is looking at me out the window. So. And how that all came about is that I was flashing back, what am I going to do here? Halfway down that runway, I touched down at 240. I'm still doing 190 knots at the 6,000 foot mark because the thing is not slowing down at all. And what I decide is that years ago, I could take my glider. Across the numbers at a little grass airport down in Williamson, Georgia, and come across the numbers at 6 feet and land 300 foot down the runway, 60 knots. Or I could come across the threshold at 6 feet, go down into very, very low ground effect, meaning scraping the belly in the grass, not on the dirt, but in the grass, fly 2,000 foot down a grass runway, climb at the end of the runway, come back into the pattern and land because I would lose no energy if I was in very low ground effect. So what I thought I could do with this aircraft was something very similar to that, and it worked. So I climb out of that hole, land on the show runway now because I'm out of fuel. And the same thing happens, except that now I'm getting blown into the pit area. So my second scratch and go is to avoid the houses at the end of this runway. And I climb out thinking it's going to flame out. And there we can see a piece of the elevator rudder hanging off the side there. But I've been out of fuel now for 2 or 3 minutes, and obviously, not something you want to see in a jet airplane. And houses at the end of that runway. So I knew I didn't want to go into those folks' yard. But I start to recognize pylon 6 out here, and knowing that I'm at the beginning of that original runway 14 again. So I pull up, see the runway, and dive back toward it again. And this time thinking, well, right here, N1 starts showing that it's, engine is shutting down. So I said, all right, well, this is it. What I'm going to do here is I'm going to put this thing on its nose cone, and I'm going to put the flaps out. I didn't want to do that up in the air, but on the ground, I figured maybe I could keep it from flipping over on its back. But by lowering the flaps, I finally had some steel that could start getting scraped off, and the plane began to slow down. Fire trucks are going nuts. They'd followed me all over the airport. And once the engine had stopped, right in here is where I started action. My heart started pounding because I had nothing else I could give it and do. But as it rolled across this runway, got blown to the downwind side, the wingtip caught a landing light and made it rotate. And I ended up on that end taxiway right at the end of the runway right there.
And this would be a tailwind landing, wouldn't it?
It was a tailwind landing. Yeah. But the reality of that was that I was looking for that right wind to help me straighten out my right turn. Mm-hmm. I was not worried about the 10, 15 knot tailwind factor there. So mm-hmm. I needed the right wind to help me try to go straight down the runway. So.
Mm-hmm. And so you came to a smoking stop there before going off the edge, obviously.
Yep. Yeah.
Right at the edge.
Yes, sir. Right at the
man.
and the fireman met me with a hose, outside the cockpit. And I look out to him. The engine is spooling down, so it's still running, but it's not running, but it's spooling down. I said, please don't squirt water on me because there's nothing in here to burn anymore. So, and sure enough, it wasn't. So it had stopped burning. So.
Huh. Wow.
So that's a heck of a story. And what I think is the most impressive thing about it really is that you were able to focus on each problem and deal with each problem and concentrate on that, but still have situational awareness about where you are, where other people are, how much gas you have, and trying to make this turn circle work out. So to use that and using the wind to make that happen. So that to me, I think is a huge lesson learned for folks about focusing on each problem and solving the problem that you have.
And when we all do takeoffs, we should be, and I continue to do it, is that I'm thinking about, even if it's a new field, I will whenever I can with Google these days, you can get a satellite view of an airport, and I say, all right, well, where am I going if I have an engine out 300 feet off the runway? And at this airport, I had thought through every of those situations and knew that I did not want to land on that show runway in a normal situation because of what it would happen, and knew I wanted to stay away from the west side because of the houses. And so I had a plan, even though I didn't have to think through it. I was at pylon 4. I knew where I would have to go to get back to the airport. And then each of these airplanes. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Once you had some semblance of control over the aircraft after the gear incident, and then that chunk of tail broke off, did you reconsider the idea of going up for a controlled, so to speak, bailout option?
Well, remembering what the gas was showing was that I had literally a few minutes worth. Yeah. And the reality is that I felt more comfortable in that aircraft, knowing how sturdy those airplanes are built, putting it down in that infield someplace than coming out of the sky, in an unknown situation. So I have reviewed that many times in my head about why did I not think after I had control that I could have, why didn't I think that I could not put the gear down again? I mean, it's like, but what I recognize is that with the limited amount of time that I had, when I found something that worked, I stayed with it. When I found something that didn't work, I didn't go back. I didn't revisit that. But that my armchair review of that myself and said, why didn't I think that maybe I could have tried that again? And I just didn't do anything again that didn't work the first time.
And actually, I think that's the best decision overall. If it didn't work the first time, how what changed? That big clunk, you didn't. And now
you didn't know that was the tail, it was a gear or whatnot. Yeah,
you didn't know that. So if you tried it again, it may not have worked out as well as it did the first time. So not a good plan to do things over again. So no, I thought that worked out really well.
Very compressed time frame too, with that fuel just running out. I know those jets just drink the gas, man, and it. Wow.
Yeah, and the difference between I'll say she's burning 300 and something gallons an hour at full throttle, and the full throttle is the only one that I had reasonable bank control. At 85% power, which is landing power settings, the plane was uncontrollable. Although even on that shot that shows me turning around and coming back after the pass by the building, I made a left turn, but I didn't even recognize the fact that I had done that. I mean, that was the first time I made a left turn in that airplane for the last 15 minutes. But I didn't pick up on that to think that was usable.
Wow. So was there any major fallout after all of this between Aurora and pilots and yourself? Are you still racing?
I did race, and in fact, the aircraft in the background next to me right now is my replacement L-39, although I brought that one home to rebuild it after I had DERs out there in Reno that know the race and work there with the folks at the airport. I paid him to do the engineering to tell me that there was nothing wrong with the airplane. That aircraft, after all of that on and off the runway, did not have a bent bulkhead in it. It did not have a scratch on the wing. I mean, the wing is 3 inches off the ground the whole time. But it is the only thing that hit the wing was a taxi light that I took out right at the end of the event. But I fully intended to rebuild the aircraft until I bought the new one, because I really felt that plane needed to fly again. But the fallout was that we did have a debrief that night, and I did get to the debrief eventually. And the gentleman that I crossed paths with was explaining what had happened. And what he was explaining, being the fighter pilot commander that he was that I had target fixation, and that I flew into him because that's what happens with new formation pilots all the time. They fixate on something, they'll just bump into it. And I said, yeah, that's not exactly the way I remember the story. But the fact that I injected myself into that practice session was the big lesson learned for me. There is that we had a situation where we had 3 racers that were on the course, me and my buddies doing this leapfrogging, and me working with the ground guys on getting closer and closer to the pylon. And then the new guys come on board. And I think that I'm going to help their training exercise and mine, because I'm going to come down onto the field in front of them and let each one of them pass me. And now I can fly in the jet wash of 3 airplanes, which is what I was focused on. But basically what was happening there is that I injected myself into a formation group that we did not brief that, right? And there was the lesson learned on my part, was that we don't do anything in this formation business that we don't talk about ahead of time. We fly to brief the flight and fly to brief. And that was a real humbling part of it for me, was that I can't say that I feel like I caused this problem, and video speaks for itself on what took place.
Mhm.
But the reality is that I didn't need to be in that position. You know, with people that are not familiar on the course and injecting myself into that situation. So the big lesson learned there for me was that, you know, when I pre-plan a flight, any flight these days, is that if I don't make it up on the way. I mean, if I decide I'm going to make a fuel stop someplace, I'm going to make that fuel stop, even though the weather might be better and I can maybe go farther. I don't make changes like that en route any longer. It's just
Stick to the
safe.
plan.
Yep.
Wow. Wow. Excellent story, Larry. Thanks so much for sharing that with us.
Yeah, that's a really fantastic story. Congratulations.
Yeah.
Thank you all for having me.
Yeah, you bet. And you're going to be racing in September, the last one.
Well, no, I'm not. I did this aircraft, and in fact, you can't zoom in on it there, but this one is painted with yellow and black stripes on it, and on the belly, it's got big yellow and black stripes on it. So when I did race it in 15, just to prove to myself that I could get back on the horse and in the saddle, but I retired after that. So I've been going out and helping folks, but no, I will not be out there this year. No.
Okay. All right.
Very good.
Thanks for joining us. That's a hell of a story.
Yeah.
Well, thanks for having me.
All right. Thanks for watching BSWorks, and stay tuned for the next one. We'll see if we can top this one.
We'll see you here.